An estimated 40 million lightning strikes hit the ground in the United States each year. On average, 28 people die from those strikes, 80% are male, and 25% are between the ages of 15 and 24. Though the most deaths come while people are outdoors, in Florida, California, and Colorado, in the summer months and on the weekends, lightning strikes occur at any time, any place, and during any weather conditions. Though the risk of being struck by lightning is extremely low, the consequences are devastating. This video tells 3 stories of people being struck by lightning and the deadly consequences. In 1968, a group of about 40 Boy Scouts and 4 adult leaders were hiking near Blairstown in northwest New Jersey. The group was hiking near the Delaware when they came to a crossroads. A small group of boys had fallen slightly behind and could not see the larger group ahead. They thought they knew which way to go, so they chose that branch and continued on. After a long while, they realized that they must have made a wrong turn. They were now alone, led by the oldest and most experienced scout in the troop, a 15-year-old named Peter. They decided to backtrack down the trail to the crossroads where they had made their navigational error. Once at the crossroads, they decided to stay put. They didn't want to compound their problems by making another mistake and choosing an incorrect direction again. Also, they knew that once the larger group realized that they were missing, they would send a group back to find them, and the scout group was certain to meet them at the crossroads. The crossroads was perched on top of a hill. This wasn't ideal, as they would be exposed to the weather, but if someone came looking for them, this is where they needed to be. It was late in the day and the winds picked up. This was an ominous sign that a storm was on its way. The group made their final decision to set up camp for the night, as they would surely be found the next day, and they were prepared to camp for the night and even more if they had to. As they set up camp, the rain began to fall and thunder could be heard getting closer and closer. The boys set up camp and crawled into their sleeping bags to try and sleep. Late into the night, some of the boys were asleep, but most were not. They were soaked, laying in pools of water and freezing as the storm raged on. The lightning was now all around them, with bright flashes and clapping thunder right on top of them. Peter was half asleep and half awake when a deafening clap filled the air and jolt of electricity pierced his body. As time instantly slowed, he saw a metal canteen flying through the air, then darkness. It took Peter about 30 seconds to come to, and when he did, all he heard was screaming. Peter checked on the other kids. They were soaking wet, freezing, and terrified in only their underwear and pajamas, but they were alive. Lightning was crashing all around the camp, and Peter knew that if he didn't leave immediately, they would be struck again. He gathered all the boys and led them down off of the hill to lower ground. The group pushed through the thick forest in only their underwear with lightning crashing all around them. After a half an hour through the forest, they came to a house where they were welcomed in and given towels and blankets to keep warm. The couple at the house called the scout camp office, and a bus came to retrieve the boys and took them back to the camp. The next day, they hiked back to the crossroads to retrieve their camping gear. Upon arrival, they found their site in tatters, with their gear strewn about. Next to Peter's site was a large tree with blackened branches and a trunk burned down to the ground where Peter had been sleeping. A lightning bolt had hit the tree and transferred to Peter either through the tree directly or through the wet ground that he had been laying on. Since the lightning strike, Peter has suffered with health problems such as being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes only 1 year after the event. He also suffered a heart attack. He said later in life that he doesn't know what effects the lightning strike ultimately had on his physical, mental, and emotional functions, but he will never forget the feeling of being struck by lightning. In June 1977, a park ranger at Shenandoah National Park was trout fishing when out of nowhere a bolt of lightning struck the top of his head, scorched his chest and stomach, and set his hair on fire. The park ranger immediately went to shore and got in his car to take cover. However, while he was waiting in his car, a bear came out of the woods and tried to steal his trout. After already being struck by lightning, he could have just cut his losses and let the bear have his catch. But this was no ordinary park ranger. This was the Spark Ranger, Roy Sullivan. Roy got out of his car, broke a tree branch from a nearby tree, and fought off the bear. According to Roy Sullivan, this was the 7th time that he had been struck by lightning, and the 28th time that he had fought off a bear. This is the heartbreaking true story of Roy Sullivan, the Spark Ranger, and how he was struck by lightning an astonishing 7 times and the repercussions on his life of those 7 strikes. Roy Sullivan began his park service at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia in 1936, just after the park was established on Christmas Day, December 25, 1935. Shenandoah National Park is over 200,000 acres and is known for its many beautiful waterfalls and wonderful hiking trails. It lies within the Blue Ridge Mountains, rising to a maximum height of around 4,000 feet. This isn't particularly high in elevation, but the weather in that area produces plenty of thunderstorms, which can be deadly if you aren't Roy Sullivan. Roy made it 6 years as a park ranger before he was first struck by lightning, which wasn't actually the first time he had been struck, but we'll get to that later. In April 1942, Roy was caught in a horrendous thunderstorm and took shelter in a newly built fire lookout tower at Miller's Head Overlook. This was a new tower and a lightning rod had not yet been installed. While he was taking cover, the lookout tower was struck by lightning 8 times and caught fire. Roy stayed in the tower as long as he could, but the fire overtook the tower. He ran out and only made it a couple of steps before he was struck. The lightning burned a half-inch strip along his right leg and exited his toe, blowing a hole in his shoe. He also lost a toenail from the blast. The fire burned the lookout to the ground, leaving a foundation that remains to this day. Later, when asked what being struck by lightning felt like, Roy stated, "Ever been shocked real bad? It's worse. Ever been scalded? It's much worse. It's like being cooked inside your skin." Roy made it another 27 years before being struck again. In July 1969, Roy was driving his truck through the mountains when lightning struck a tree directly next to his truck. The electricity traveled through the tree and jumped through his open window, striking Roy and burning off his eyebrows, his eyelashes, and again, setting his hair on fire. Almost exactly 1 year later, Roy was at his home in his front yard when a lightning bolt struck a nearby transformer and jumped from the transformer to Roy's left shoulder. His shoulder was said to have been seared like a lump of steak. Roy had now been struck by lightning 3 separate times and was becoming a little bit famous in the area and was interviewed by several media outlets. "I have tried to lead a good life. I have never been a fearful man, but I have to tell you the truth. When I hear it thunder now, I feel a little shaky." Just a couple of months after the interview, Roy was working at Shenandoah Station when he was struck again, and again his hair was set ablaze. He ran to the restroom and put it out with a wet towel. At this point, Roy avoided all storm clouds. Anytime he would see a cloud that looked even a little bit concerning, he would hop into his truck and drive to avoid it. "I don't believe that God is after me. If he was, the first bolt would have been enough. Best I can figure is that I have some chemical, some mineral in my body that draws lightning. I just wish I knew." In 1973, a storm began forming overhead. Roy ran to his truck and sped away. He made it. When he was out of reach of the storm, he stopped, stepped outside, and was immediately struck by lightning. The lightning went down his left arm and leg, jumped to his right leg at the knee, and blew off his shoe. He grabbed a canteen of water and put out his hair, which was on fire. "Just before it strikes, I smell a certain smell, like sulfur, and my hair bristles all over. That's the signal. In about 2 seconds, no longer than 3, it hits. Too late to hide." The 6th time that Roy was struck by lightning was similar to the 5th. A storm cloud appeared, Roy ran, and was struck. The 7th and final time was in 1977 when he was trout fishing and fought off the bear. All strike events were documented by Shenandoah National Park Superintendent R. Taylor Huskins. Furthermore, there were 2 other undocumented strikes. Roy also claimed that he was struck as a child while helping his father cut wheat, and his wife was struck while standing next to Roy. Roy is now in the Guinness Book of World Records for being struck by lightning 7 times. Roy received some fame from the strikes, but this left him very lonely. People avoided him everywhere he went. Naturally, people avoid me. I was walking with the chief ranger one day and lightning struck way off, and he said, "I'll see you later, Roy." There's a restaurant on Loft Mountain that even if it's just forecast, they won't let me in. I can't blame them. Who wants to be near somebody that's all the time getting struck by lightning? When Roy was home with his family and a storm rolled in, his family would gather in the living room and he would sit in the kitchen scared and alone. It all became too much in 1983 when at the age of 71 he turned a gun on himself and ended his life. It is said to be because of an unrequited love, But maybe Roy Sullivan, the Spark Ranger, was just overcome by loneliness. On May 17, 2016, Luke Scheimer was watching the storm while talking on his phone in a wooden-covered porch in Crescent Beach, Florida. Luke looked down at his wrist at a tattoo. December 30th, 2010. This was Luke's Alive Day, as he called it. On this date in Afghanistan, Luke and his army team members were in a military vehicle when an IED exploded beneath them. It was a terrifying event, but fortunately the IED had been buried a little bit too deep. The team suffered no injuries from the blast, but they all knew that they had gotten lucky. If the device wasn't buried so deep, they would have all died that day. To commemorate their Alive Day, each team member got the date tattooed on their wrist. As Luke stood on the porch, talking on the phone in the rain, his father-in-law, Shane Sennett, was downstairs watching television when lightning struck the house. He described it as shaking the whole house and the loudest noise that he had ever heard. Shane began looking around the house for his son, who was upstairs. Once he found his son, he was looking for damage around the house. That's when he went to the porch and saw Luke. I found him within 30 seconds of him being struck. His eyes were open, but he wasn't breathing. It took Shane about 10 seconds to realize that Luke had been struck by lightning. Luke had been out for a jog, and Shane noticed that his jogging shorts were singed. That's when he sent his son for help and called 911. He began performing CPR as instructed by the 911 dispatcher. When the paramedics arrived, they took over and continued until Luke was resuscitated. But Luke didn't wake up. He was in a coma. Luke was transported to Flagler Hospital, where Luke's wife Carrie and her mother Jody met them. They were put in a small room as Luke was taken to the surgical intensive care unit. Carrie said that the wait was excruciating. She didn't even know if he was alive or dead, and just had to sit there and wait to find out. The doctors eventually told her that Luke was alive. He had a cardiac arrest and some minor brain swelling, and was in a coma. Luke stayed in the ICU for 3 weeks where he was stabilized. Carrie later praised the ICU team at Flagler. Then Luke was transported to another hospital in Daytona Beach for 7 weeks, then on to Shepherd Center. All the while, Carrie was right by Luke's side as they celebrated his 30th birthday and their 6th wedding anniversary. The doctors told Carrie that Luke would most likely never wake up, but after 8 weeks, he opened his eyes. He started by just opening his eyes a little at a time. At first, he wasn't coherent and couldn't focus, but he would open his eyes. Then he slowly began to understand. One day, he mouthed the word, "Hi," to Carrie. In February of 2017, he was sent home. He continued to progress, with Carrie teaching him to bathe and eat. Luke succumbed to his injuries on August 28, 2019, after a 3-year fight for his life. He was 33 years old. Luke never would have thought he was in danger standing on the wood-covered porch. We've sat out there and watched the rain so many times, but it is dangerous. Carrie advocated for people to be aware during thunderstorms. During thunderstorms, do not take shelter under trees. Stay out of the water, off of beaches, and out of swimming pools. Everyone knows this, but it's still dangerous. This is True Mysteries. Please like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.